That's your little bird. She's I can't get here at 8 o'clock, so, because the earliest I can drop my son off is 7. So, I can't get here until reliably 8:30. Very nice. Grown up. Yeah. I know I have a nanny for him. He's been our nanny for 3-4 years now. She got married in the fall. She got married. He's on active duty in the Army, so he's at a boot camp. So she goes up to Tennessee on the weekend, and then during the week she's in nursing school, and she goes to nursing school and takes care of her.
Did anybody want to sign up to speak on the bill?
We tend to have, good. But he tends to keep babysitting. So there's a lot of continuity there, but I think it's good for him. So, all right. Josh, are we ready to go? All right. Thank you, ladies and gentlemen. This is a hearing on House Bill 440. As everybody is aware, House Bill 440 will raise the juvenile court jurisdiction to 17 to include our 17-year-olds. Right now, Georgia's one of 3 states still adjudicating their 17-year-olds in state or superior court as adults. In House Bill 440 will change that. In the process of kind of researching this issue, one of the folks that I came across was Josh Rovner. He's with the Sentencing Project in Washington, D.C., and he did a very detailed analysis. Members of the committee, you have the handout, and if we have any extra copies, I'll be more than happy to disseminate this out to members of the public that are out there. But he will be going over some of the statistics about juvenile court and 17-year-olds and their arrest records and arrest rates and that sort of thing. So without further, Josh is the only one that we will be hearing from today. This is just kind of an informational hearing. There's a lot of dissemination of different kinds of information on the issue. So I thought it would be beneficial for us just to have a very clear, concise view of just numbers and, kind of what the status of things are in Georgia. So Josh is the only one that's going to be testifying. Members of the committee, as always, I welcome your input and questions as Josh kind of walks us through his presentation. And without further ado, we will turn it over to Josh Rovner with Sentencing Project.
Thank you so much, Madam Chairman. Thank you so much to the members of the committee who've invited me today, especially to the 5 members of this committee who are already co-sponsoring this piece of legislation. My name is Josh Rovner. I'm the Senior Advocacy Associate at the Sentencing Project, a Washington, D.C. think tank. I've worked there for 6 years on an array of juvenile justice issues, including parallel legislation in Michigan, Missouri, and South Carolina. I'm here today to testify on behalf of HB 440, and I'll present, as the chairman said, an analysis of publicly available data on the state of youth justice here in Georgia, emphasizing trends in youth arrests and in the Georgia budget. My presentation will be focused on data, but I would be remiss not to briefly mention the many rationales for adding 17-year-olds into the juvenile courts. First, that 17-year-olds are developmentally similar to other adolescents, which is why the law limits their civic engagement on matters like jury service or voting. Additionally, their offending patterns mirror those of their younger peers. Second, that juvenile courts have better outcomes for youth and adult courts, which benefits both wayward youth and the communities they call home. And third, that other states have implemented similar legislation at much lower costs than anticipated. I find it compelling that as Georgia strives to avoid being the last state to raise the age, none of the 10 states that have done so thus far have reconsidered their decision. Nor has any state followed the lead of Georgia, Texas, and Wisconsin to routinely add 17-year-olds into their criminal courts, excuse me. The closest example I can find is that in 2007, the state of Rhode Island briefly lowered its age to 16, hoping to save money, and raised it back again 4 months later when it found it did not. While my testimony relies heavily on data, I hope none of us lose sight of the moral imperative behind this bill. We're talking about 17-year-olds. They are or should be in high school. We have the opportunity to shape their futures, and thus all of our futures along with theirs, by providing them with the services they need, even when they mess up. Adolescence is not a permanent condition. It is not a chronic illness. It is a stage of human development marked in part by reckless behavior and a lack of respect for authority that can and does put kids in conflict with the law. American kids will get arrested about 500,000 times this year. Very, very few of those arrested kids will have begun lives as career criminals. Offending peaks around age 19 for most offenses and then begins to decline with maturity. All of us who have recovered from our teenage mistakes, delinquent or otherwise, know that we are different than we were in those years. That's why this bill should become law. The data reinforce the case for the bill, but they are not the reason it should pass. That said, the short-term impact is real, and today's presentation will respond to legitimate concerns that I've heard about the impact on defenders and prosecutors, on judges, and on counties. Today's presentation will cover youth offending, specifically for 17-year-olds, but also for all Georgians under 18, and I'll also turn to the budget. Let me start with what we know about 17-year-old arrests in Georgia. As shown on the blue bar on the screen, there were about 6,700 arrests of 17-year-olds in 2018. That's a large number, but let me put it in some context. First, the recent trends. 6,700 arrests reflects a 20% decline from just a few years ago. Things seem to be getting better. Second, a very small percentage of those arrests are things that the FBI considers to be violent crime index offenses: murder, robbery, rape, aggravated assault. They're shown in the red bars, and in a typical year, they comprise about 5% of arrests of 17-year-olds. By way of contrast, the four most common reasons that 17-year-olds are arrested in Georgia are drug law violations, theft, assault, and disorderly conduct, together comprising more than 50% of arrests. That's largely what the juvenile courts will be dealing with. The packet that's been handed out earlier has information that looks like this one. It's data from GBI for the FBI's Uniform Crime Reporting categories of arrest for the last 4 years. There's some highlighting to show the most common reasons 17-year-olds are arrested. Embezzlement is rare. Disorderly conduct is not. It's a document that looks like this one, and I've created versions of this sheet for each of the counties represented by the members of this committee. Let me add a note of caution as you look at these numbers, because there's a reason I don't care for one-year snapshots. I think it's important to view a few years together before drawing any conclusions about what happened from one moment to the next. These numbers are not predictions. The 20% drop in 17-year-olds arrests over the last few years is not a crystal ball about the next few years, nor is it a prediction about a particular county. Moreover, a one-year increase of the kind that you see here for one county, a small county that I've chosen not to name, does not define a trend. Outliers happen. For small counties in particular, one expects to see large swings because 10 additional or 10 fewer arrests are much more visible in a smaller population. Now, 6,700 arrests is a big number, and no one is saying otherwise, but the impact is less than you might think. Dividing these numbers out by county for 2008 reveals wide variation, which is not surprising in a state with 159 counties. 7 counties had 200 or more arrests. 10 additional counties had more than 100 arrests. 19 more counties had more than 50 arrests. Though 14 counties, all of them small, did not report their arrests. That leaves 123 counties with fewer than 50 arrests of 17-year-olds in 2018, again with a small number of very small counties that did not report. That's one arrest a week, and if HB 440 passes, those arrests won't vanish, they'll just be handled differently. A moment ago, I noted the data do not provide a crystal ball about the future, but I do want to take a look back at the last 10 years to see what's happened to youth offending in the recent past. In 2008, there were 54,000 youth arrests in Georgia, and as of 2017, there were 24,000 arrests. That's a 56% decline. This totals the dispositions of arrests for all youth under 18, as reported by GBI. Now, it's reasonable to look at a graph like this one and think that Georgia has solved the problem of teenage crime that vexed the 1990s, with talk of super predators or the passage of Georgia's 7 Deadly Sins law, which took place in 1994. But that's not the case. Georgia's arrest rate fell at an identical pace to the rest of the nation over the years shown here. This graph represents Georgia's slice of an American story. So what do these falling arrest counts mean with regard to expanding the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts? Let me start by noting that about 60% of youth arrests are presently sent to juvenile court, and I've highlighted that proportion in red. Next, 20% of youth arrests are sent to superior or criminal court. That number too has fallen each year. That includes all 17-year-olds arrested on any charge, as well as people under 17 who are charged as if they were adults based on the crime. Most of the rest are handled within the police department. Adding all the youth cases currently in the adult criminal courts to the cases sent to juvenile courts reveals remarkable breathing room. There were fewer youth and there were fewer youths in adult and juvenile court in 2017 than in juvenile court alone as recently as 2013. That's true for every year prior to 2013 too. These trends ripple through the system in very positive ways. For example, during the years with a 55% decline in juvenile referrals, there were 56% fewer youth sent to the regional youth detention centers. Now, I don't imagine that things ran perfectly back in 2013, nor do I imagine that they run perfectly today. But this demonstrates that whatever burdens the system handled in 2013 and the years before it would be in line with the impact of adding 17-year-olds into the juvenile court. Probably less than this, because a lot of those are superior court cases, the most serious ones for prosecutors and defense lawyers now, and they would stay where they are today. Now, let's turn to the budget of some key agencies. I looked at 4 agencies because of the report that you see on screen that the state auditor addressed to Representative Oliver 3 years ago for HB 53, a prior version of this bill. In that report, the auditor estimated significant costs for the Department of Juvenile Justice, the Department of Behavioral Health and Developmental Disabilities, the Public Defender Council, and the Prosecuting Attorneys Council. I refer here to the recurring costs mentioned in the report, not the alleged need for additional construction. So I looked back at 10 years of the budgets in brief to see the original budgets and amended final budgets for these agencies. The amended final budgets are shown in orange. It looks like the screen has gone dark. There we go. The amended final versions are shown in orange, and the original budget is shown in dark blue, which is why for the most recent year, all I have is the original budget. Not a huge gap in most years for most agencies, and I will start with the Department of Juvenile Justice. In FY11, the amended final budget was $294 million. For the present fiscal year, DJJ has been allocated $359 million. That's an increase of 22%, an increase of 22%. I looked a little more closely at the DJJ budget to see where the increases were largest within the department, which is what's shown here. The budget for the regional youth detention centers increased by 23%. The budget for the youth development campuses increased by 40%. The budget for community services increased by 16%, and the administrative budget fell by 9%. In short, the budget for DJJ has been steadily increasing as the number of referrals to juvenile court have been in decline. If we go back to 2008, that provides 10 years of information on juvenile referrals, stopping with the 2017 count, but we also have budgets starting back at those same years and budgets going through FY 2020. So on this graph, that blue line shows the department budgets for the Department of Juvenile Justice going back for the years that I'm discussing here. As the budget increased, the referrals to the juvenile courts has been in decline. I said it was about 60% earlier. That's the red line on this graph. Meanwhile, the budget for the Department of Juvenile Justice has increased every year since FY11. I'll get a little bit more specific now, because here's the budget for the RYDCs. Again, increasing generally over time, especially over the last 10 years that we have data. Adding in the referrals, the admissions, to the detention centers, those have declined by 60% over the years shown. That's the red line. The blue line shows how the budgets, the operating budgets for the detention centers have increased. The red line shows how the admissions to the detention centers has decreased. I'll turn quickly to the budgets for the other three departments, behavioral health and developmental disability. Amended final budget in FY11 was $1 billion. For the present fiscal year, it's $1.4 billion, an increase of 38%. Public Defender's Council in FY11, the amended final budget was $5.2 million. For the present fiscal year, that agency has been allocated $7.4 million, a 56% increase. The Prosecuting Attorney's Council. In FY11, amended final budget was $6.6 million. For the present fiscal year, that agency has been allocated $10.3 million, a 42% increase for the 10 years shown. Excuse me, I seem to have something inconsistent with my graphs. It's an increase, though, from 6.6 to 10.3. So while it says 22% on screen, it is closer to 42%. That's not a 22% increase. Now, I just want to wrap up by going back to this graph here. Georgia's data has been very clear that declining referrals to the juvenile courts have coincided with increased budgets for the state for the departments that implement the juvenile code. None of this is to say that implementation of HB 440 will be easy. There will be challenges as with any public endeavor, but the data strongly suggests that those challenges will be manageable. My testimony does not address the auditor's analysis of the prior Raise the Age bill, that's HB 53 from 2017. I look forward to amending my remarks if and when the auditor estimates the impact of HB 440 due to my sincere doubts about the auditor's analysis of that prior bill. Declines in juvenile offending and referrals have provided breathing room for the addition of 17-year-olds into the jurisdiction of the juvenile courts. The Sentencing Project is pleased to endorse this bill. We're eager to see it advance in this committee, and I'm very excited to take any questions that you may have.
Thank you very much for your presentation. Matt, I'm going to ask you if, Naisha. Well, intern extraordinaire Naisha is my intern this year. She's helping keep juvenile justice on the rails. If you would hand out copies of the PowerPoint presentation for the committee members, that would be awesome. And I will open it up to any questions that the committee members might have. You've done either a really good job, you've managed to strike them speechless. So, Representative Kendrick.
Hello, thank you for this, for the presentation. Do you know how many other states have already passed this raising of the wage?
Yeah, so dating back to about 2007, there's been 10 states that have passed it. Most recently, I was involved in South Carolina. that implemented on July 1st of this year. There were certainly some hiccups along the way, but they have had a successful implementation. North Carolina prior included 16 and 17-year-olds in their adult courts. North Carolina has added the 16-year-olds and is on their way to adding 17-year-olds. And all the coverage I've seen is that that's positive as well. Thank you.
Thank you. Representative Collins.
You may have answered this question, but on this handout we have where it has our counties broken down.
Yep.
I see my county there, and the number of arrests. Do you take into account if they're prosecuted as adults there? I know the arrest they're 17, but are they being prosecuted as?
Well, if they're 17-year-olds, they would be charged as adults, if I'm not mistaken. What happened beyond the point of arrest, I don't have any data on that just yet.
Okay. So they're still not having the benefit of the doubt then by some local judges that.
Yeah,
Is that what you're
I
saying?
mean, one of the things that you see in the data, let me dial back to a prior slide about the cases that are ending up in the criminal courts, which is this one. Largely, that's 17-year-olds. You'll see people under 17 who are charged as if they were adults under your 7 deadly sins law,
Okay.
under mandatory waivers that take place otherwise, discretionary waivers. But that's the number of cases in the criminal courts of people under 18. That's generally going to be 17-year-olds. So that's the impact statewide, but I don't have by county.
All right. Thank you, Representative. Vice Chair Dubnik.
Thank you, Madam Chair. So you mentioned a number of other states have moved in the direction of the things we're discussing here. You've given us a lot of data on the budget and very appreciative of that. But what have other states seen as far as impacts to their budgets, to the flow? Is this helping juvenile courts? Is this causing more backlogs? I'm just looking for some comparative data.
I mean, one of the things that's been wonderful is that the decreases that we've seen in youth offending have not been slowed down by any stretch of the imagination in the states that have implemented thus far. Connecticut is one of the states that I looked at closely. Connecticut has seen a 56% drop in the number of kids in their juvenile courts, despite the fact that they've added 16 and 17-year-olds into the courts. One of my colleague organizations, the Justice Policy Institute, did a study about the impacts of Raise the Age, and the estimates that were done in advance of what the costs would be, in each case, the costs were vastly overestimated. Amazingly enough, when the state of Illinois raised its age, it didn't budget any money for the implementation. Despite that, they were still able to add 17-year-olds into their juvenile courts without any budgetary impacts.
Thank you. Thank you, Vice Chair Dubnik. Any other questions from the committee? Mr. Roder, we are very appreciative of your time and efforts today. We've given us a lot to think about, and certainly I think this has been a valuable perspective for members of the committee, as we move forward. Ladies and gentlemen, does anybody have anything else that they would like to address on this meeting? All right. I appreciate your attention. Thank you so much, and we are adjourned.